Number 10. Jody Warner. A 32-year-old woman from Dallas made headlines after she verbally assaulted an Uber driver. The man who picked her up late one night after she'd had a few drinks was 26-year-old Sean Platt. As soon as Jody Warner got into his car, she was acting out of line. She rolled down his windows to yell at a few of her friends, which by itself isn't too bad. A few minutes into the ride though, Platt tried to be friendly and chat, but she responded in anger. Then, Jody furiously told the driver to use different directions than what the app said. Luckily, the entire exchange was caught on tape. For his own safety while giving strangers rides, Sean had a video camera in his vehicle. The footage showed Jody calling the man inappropriate names and using her position as the county's assistant district attorney to threaten him. During the tantrum, Jody suddenly said, "I think this might be kidnapping right now, actually." This was strange, since Platt was literally telling her she could get out of the car at any point. In response to this, the woman just said, "Who are they going to believe? I'm a district attorney." The situation got so out of hand that the Uber driver eventually just called the police. He was tired of dealing with Jody in her drunken state. When officers came, they arrested and took her away in a patrol car. Not long after the video went public, the attorney was fired from her position. Even though no criminal charges were made against Jody, Faith Johnson, the district attorney, said her actions did not align with the office's principles. Number 9. Carolina Vargas. On paper, the concept of Uber and Lyft sounds kinda sketchy. Letting people you don't know into your car or having a random person drive you around goes against everything most parents teach their children from a young age. Don't talk to strangers. While the app's rating systems and background checks typically prevent danger, they don't always work. In May 2020, a woman was making some money working as a driver when she accepted a longer than usual ride from a 51-year-old man named Christopher Miller. After picking the man up, something didn't seem right. This was not the first time Carolina Vargas had given a ride to this person, but there was just an unsettling feeling in the air. At some point during the drive, Miller pulled out a knife and threatened Vargas with it. He tried to kidnap her, but she wasn't going to just sit there and be taken. In order to escape, Vargas jumped out of the moving vehicle. She had to get her injuries treated in the hospital, but at least she wasn't taken by Miller. The man had a history with law enforcement and breaking the law. In his past, Miller had stolen a trailer, failed to pay his kids' child support, and much more. His ex-wife even said he'd threatened and harassed her countless times. Thankfully, police were able to arrest him after the Uber ride before he could get away. He was charged with kidnapping and assault for what he did to Carolina. Number 8. Michael Marcus Jordan. On October 6, 2022, a woman in San Diego arranged a ride on her Uber app. The car got there and she didn't think twice about getting in. Little did she know, the man who picked her up had an extremely violent past as a criminal. Over the years, 43-year-old Michael Marcus Jordan had sexually assaulted women, been convicted of assault, and much more. If she had known about the driver's history, the woman definitely would not have gotten in the car. As a previous victim of sexual assault, she usually felt safe with Uber services since they claimed to conduct thorough screening before hiring drivers. They didn't do a good enough job with Jordan though. During the ride, the passenger fell asleep at one point while in the back seat. When she eventually woke up, she was horrified to see Jordan putting his hands up her skirt. Not knowing what to do in the moment, she pretended to still be sleeping. The driver was an incredibly large man, 6 feet 9 inches tall, and could easily overpower her if he felt like it. In an attempt to save herself, the woman pulled out her phone and started to record what was happening. When Jordan realized what she was doing, he smacked the device out of her hands and continued the assault. After he pulled to the side of the road, the victim was able to pry the door open and run away. The driver drove off quickly before she could flag someone down and call the cops. The authorities arrested Jordan not long after, and he was charged for his crimes. Number 7. Imposter. In December 2018, a man from Washington pretended to be an Uber driver to take advantage of a woman. The woman's friend told her she'd arranged a ride since she'd been drinking at a bar in Seattle. That's when a random guy claimed he was the Uber. Usually, the app shows users a picture of the person who will be taking them from point A to point B. But since she hadn't gotten the ride herself, she didn't know who was supposed to be the driver. During the ride, the 34-year-old attacker pulled off the road and raped the girl who was unable to defend herself. After having his way with her, he took her home. His face was captured on the victim's Ring security doorbell camera as he helped her into the house. Surprisingly, the suspect took the initiative and went to the authorities himself. He wasn't there to confess though. Instead, he told officers a fake story about what happened that night. His wife had confronted him the night of the incident, asking where he'd been. Apparently, the man told her that he did have sex with the passenger, but he thought it was all consensual. When authorities went to the victim to hear her side of things, she revealed the truth. While drunk, she wasn't able to tell the driver that she didn't consent. Since this information came out, the man was sent to jail and charged with sexual assault. Number 6. MHAMEDI-ALAOUI. 46-year-old MHAMEDI-ALAOUI earned money by driving customers around with rideshare apps. In 2022, he kidnapped a 19-year-old passenger against her will. The woman was forced to jump out of the car after the man refused to stop at the agreed location. She asked him a few times to go back, but he refused to do anything. He had more than one chance to make the right decision and let her go, but instead, he just started driving faster. The girl was so terrified that she thought about using a pocket knife to defend herself against Alaoui. Eventually, the road traffic forced him to slow down. The passenger took this chance to get away. At about 1:30 in the afternoon, she was able to get to the Massachusetts police station and file a formal report. Not long after, authorities were able to apprehend the suspect in a nearby shopping center. They had gotten most of the information they needed about him after contacting Uber directly. MHAMEDI was later charged with kidnapping. Number 5. DESHAWN LONGMIRE. On June 24, 2022, a pastor from Houston, Texas was killed by an Uber driver. Ronald Mouton Sr. had gotten into an argument with 23-year-old DESHAWN LONGMIRE while they were stopped at a light. The two men were both driving separate vehicles. Mouton was in a white BMW, while the rideshare driver was in a black Honda. It's unclear what the fight started over, but witnesses at the scene described seeing Longmire reach his hand out of the window while holding a loaded pistol. A shot rang through the air, and Mouton was hit. The suspect then quickly made his getaway while the victim crashed the BMW. When investigators got there, the pastor was already dead. Despite denying being anywhere near the accident when the murder happened, Uber's records indicate that Longmire was actually around the area at the time. Luckily, there weren't any passengers in his car during the crime, and no one else was injured. The victim's family was devastated by the news of their loved one's death. After preaching for over 30 years and dutifully serving his community, Mouton was taken too soon. They hope that the court will give a fitting sentence to the killer. While no sentence has been formally declared for Longmire, we hope that justice will be served. Number 4. Fiery crash. Driving a car can be very dangerous. Just one wrong move could mean life or death for multiple people on the road at any given time. As most of us know, accidents happen though. On August 12, 2022, an Uber driver was traveling in Arlington, Virginia. He suddenly suffered from a medical emergency and was unable to control his vehicle. Sadly, he swerved right into a local pub called Ireland's Four Courts. The crash caused flames to overtake the property. Firemen and first responders were called to the pub to help put the fire out. Eventually, they were able to get things under control, but not before the damage was done. Aftermath images of the restaurant show tables covered in dusty ash, a charred interior, and the burnt remains of a once bustling community establishment. The driver survived, luckily, and it doesn't seem like anyone else was hurt in the crash. Since it wasn't the man's fault, and the incident was caused by an uncontrollable condition, no criminal charges will be pressed against him. The bar was able to raise $95,000 through donations on GoFundMe to help pay for renovations. In a statement, the manager of Four Courts said that they hope to start rebuilding soon. Number 3. Travis S. Smith. At the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, the entire world practically shut down. People were terrified, not knowing if this was the end of times or just a simple flu that would quickly pass. Whatever your personal opinions are about the virus, you have to admit that it was a difficult time for many. Some individuals have much stronger feelings than others though, and unfortunately, don't know when to keep their opinions to themselves. In August 2020, a Lyft driver picked up a couple of guys and a 7-year-old boy late one night. 36-year-old Travis S. Smith was one of the passengers, and he seemed friendly at first. He politely chatted with the driver, but things turned sour quickly. In the car, there was a plastic barrier separating the front and back seats. Since this was still relatively early on in the pandemic, the driver was just trying to protect himself with the partition. Smith asks a few questions about it, which seem unremarkable at first. The driver told the man that he'd gotten the barrier off of Amazon, but Smith called him a liar. The passenger said he'd seen other Uber and Lyft cars with the same partition. During this strange interrogation, the interior light in the vehicle pops on for some reason. At this, Smith starts to get aggressive. The driver simply asked if he could open one of the back doors, when Smith violently yanked at the plastic barrier and put the man into a chokehold. The other adult passenger cheered the fight on as he took his child out of the car. The driver had multiple small injuries after the assault. One of the more serious ones included a facial hematoma. Travis Smith was later arrested for the attack. The charges put against him included battery as well as child endangerment. Number 2. CLARE DUNN. Since they're giving people rides in their own vehicles, Uber and Lyft drivers have every right to refuse service to unruly passengers. They don't, however, have the right to assault people as they kick them out of the car. In August 2021, 46-year-old driver Albert Bokey picked up the famous country singer Claire Dunn one night in Nashville, Tennessee. During the Lyft ride, the country artist asked the driver a simple question about the directions he was following. According to her, he then became extremely violent. They started to argue in a screaming match about a missed turn when the man slammed on the brakes and stopped the car. He got out of the vehicle and yanked Claire out forcefully before she had any time to react. Albert proceeded to push her face into a nearby ditch before leaving her there and driving away. Later that night, Claire was taken to an emergency room and was able to speak with police. Through their help, Albert was identified and quickly arrested. For his crimes, he was charged with assault. The musician later shared her story with People magazine and recounted just how terrified she was during the incident. Number 1. Ella. On top of offering ride services, Uber also has food delivery options. Their drivers are able to accept orders and bring them straight to customers' homes. In March 2022, 22-year-old Melanie Polanco ordered a pizza through the app. She was shocked, though, when she realized the driver who delivered her food had stolen her dog in the process. The pooch, Ella, is a Cocker Spaniel mix and was only 6 months old at the time of the dog napping. Melanie saw the man take off with her pet through apartment surveillance footage. She believes that Ella somehow got out of her unit while the door was left open. A few days after reporting the theft, Melanie got a call from the thief. He said that he saw the footage she sent to the police on TV and that he didn't steal the dog. The man, who has only been named Michael, went on saying that he believed Ella was just lost. Not long after the phone call, the pooch was returned. Police apprehended the man who gave the dog back, but he said he wasn't Michael, just someone who was paid to bring Ella home. Melanie didn't care, though. She was just happy to have her beloved pet back, safe and sound.
Number 10. Vampire Trucker. In 2013, a Utah man was arrested for bringing women inside his truck and keeping them as sex slaves. How did he get them in his truck? He pretended to be a sexy vampire. Timothy Vafides, whose name definitely adds to this story, used to wear fangs to make himself look like a creature of the night. But instead of acting like royalty, he chose being a trucker instead. Obviously, a trucker and vampire isn't the best combo, but he called his semi the Twilight Express to add some extra flavor and appeal. He started his adventure in the mid-90s and lured young girls onto his truck, promising to show them the good life. But it didn't take long for his true colors to come into view and his charming persona to wear off. He would eventually switch into predator mode as he filed down his victims' teeth with a knife and sexually abused them while driving around the country. The girls were usually impressionable young 18 and 19-year-olds, but he's also been accused of assaulting his own relative and sometimes even minors. Surprisingly enough, though, no one really caught on to him as he kept his bizarre vampire trucker cult going for almost 2 decades. Of course, he had so much power over his prey that they never spoke up against him. The operation was only revealed during a random interaction at a weighbridge in Minnesota. One of the officers there noticed bruises on an 18-year-old with him, which led to the man finally giving up his cover in 2013. He later pled guilty to his crimes and was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Number 9, out of gas. In May 2019, a woman who'd run out of gas on the I-24 accepted a truck driver's request to take her to the next exit, but instead of helping and dropping her off, he decided to kidnap her. 63-year-old Roy Nellish from Alabama had been a long-haul trucker for over 40 years and was driving one of his usual routes along the I-24 in Kentucky. When he got close to Fort Campbell, he came across a woman stranded next to him on the road with car troubles. Apparently, she'd run out of gas, so Nellish offered to give her a ride to the next exit in Tennessee, which the woman humbly accepted. When the exit came up, he didn't pull over. The trucker kept on driving. At this point, she obviously started to scream and tried to escape. Nellish knew what he was doing, though. He pulled over, pointed a gun at her, and told her he's going to kidnap and rape her. Now, the struggle began, as he tried to force her into the sleeper part of the cab and assault her. During the fight, the woman managed to turn his gun around and pull the trigger, but sadly, the weapon didn't fire. So he continued to hit her in the head and handcuffed her to the sleeper. Again, though, she proved to be too much for him as she slipped out of the cuffs and attacked Nellish from behind with a blanket. And just like that, she was able to put him in a chokehold while steering the truck and honking for help at the same time. The trucker finally gave in and pulled over to let her out. Even though she got help, Nellish was able to flee the scene. That being said, he was arrested a few miles down the road in Springfield, Tennessee, where the police found weapons, digital cameras, a bloody bag full of women's underwear, and laptops with violent pornography on them. He was indicted for his crimes in 2020, but passed away in jail only a couple of years later without serving his full sentence. Number 8, up in flames. In April 2019, a Texas trucker who'd never committed a crime in his life caused a fireball explosion that killed 4 people. 26-year-old Rohel Aguirre Maderos was working for a Houston-based trucking company and was hauling lumber in his 18-wheeler. He'd done this a million times before and confidently knew the route through Interstate 70 like the back of his hand. But whether it was due to a lack of attention or something else, he failed to spot a rush hour congestion on the road ahead in Lakewood, Colorado. And just like that, he plowed straight into over a dozen vehicles, including some other trucks. He was going over 80 miles per hour or just under 130 kilometers an hour, which resulted in a massive fireball explosion. The accident was incredibly devastating for everyone involved. It ended up killing 4 and hospitalizing 6 others. In fact, many people called it one of the worst road accidents they'd ever witnessed. According to police, this was easily avoidable since before the crash, Rohel swerved multiple times and forced others off the road when he could have just used a runaway truck ramp instead. Rohel survived the crash but was sentenced to a whopping 110 years in prison. Most people thought the sentence was too harsh since his driving record didn't even have a blemish before the accident, and he didn't even show any signs of drug or alcohol use either. As a matter of fact, over 4.5 million people have signed a petition to reduce his sentence, and other truckers have also boycotted the route to support and raise awareness for him. Number 7, free candy. In 2019, a trucker kidnapped 2 Belton children by promising them to buy an iPhone 8 if they got in his vehicle. 47-year-old Marshall Pendergrass messaged the 12-year-old boy and his 14-year-old sister on Instagram, saying he'd get them a bunch of snacks and spoil them. For their first hangout, at least, he actually did do that, but his next request for them was to tag along with him so he could buy them an iPhone 8. So, thinking they were going to get some free stuff, the children obviously agreed. They waited until their mother had left the house on a Friday to meet Pendergrass at a nearby truck stop. Also, according to the boy, he thought they were going to Metro PCs to activate the phone and sign some paperwork. The trucker had other ideas and wanted to kidnap them and take them to Nevada instead. So when he didn't stop for a while, the children told them to just take them home. Pendergrass, on the other hand, replied by saying his GPS wasn't working and they needed to calm down. At this point, they told him to either take them home or get an Uber for them, or else they'd call the police. Again, he was having none of it and zip-tied their hands to keep them quiet. Thankfully, law enforcement pinged his cell phone near Winslow, Arizona, where they found him at a truck stop. Even then, he initially didn't let them search the truck, saying it was in the middle of the night, but the girl stuck her foot out of the top of the bunk of the cab, which officers spotted. Pendergrass was arrested on the spot. Number 6. No bikes allowed. In June 2021, an Arizona box truck driver was sentenced to 16 years in prison for plowing into innocent bicyclists on a Nevada highway. 45-year-old Jordan Alexander Barson was driving on Route 95 between Boulder City and Searchlight when he fell asleep at the wheel. This was his regular work route, so it wasn't like he didn't know what he was doing. Sadly, in front of him was a group of 20 cyclists who were making the annual 130-mile or just under 210-kilometer ride from Las Vegas through the scenic desert in Nevada and California. Also, they were pedaling behind a Subaru Outback support vehicle to protect them from the headwind. Little did they know the real danger would come from behind. Barson plowed straight into the cyclists, crushing them between his truck and the support vehicle. As a result, 5 of them died and 4 had to go to the hospital for treatment. Later investigation revealed that the trucker was driving under the influence of methamphetamines, and he was actually 9 times over the impairment limit. So after a quick trial and a lot of remorse, Barson was sentenced to 16 years in prison and had to pay $60,000 in restitution to his victims. Number 5. Sweet Tooth. In September 2020, a Knoxville ice cream truck driver lured a child into his van and kidnapped the young girl. 29-year-old Troy Allen Stansbury was apparently driving around the Clinton neighborhood looking for someone to victimize when a 15-year-old child showed up at his truck to get some treats. Thinking no one was around, the driver promised to give her free ice cream if she came with him. Thankfully, the girl's grandmother saw her getting into the truck and immediately reported it to police. In the meantime, though, the owner of the ice cream company also called the police department, saying one of his employees hadn't returned with the van after his shift ended. Authorities were quickly able to identify Troy and the child. Only a few hours later, the girl was found in a motel in Caryville, Tennessee, where Stansbury was apparently going to engage in forced sexual activity. He was arrested on the spot and fired from his job at the same time. He was then charged with aggravated kidnapping. Number 4. Highway Oven. In June 2022, a Texas driver smuggling migrant workers caused one of the deadliest incidents in history when 53 of them died in the back of his truck. 45-year-old Homero Zamorano Jr. had been trafficking migrants from Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador for quite a while, and this definitely wasn't his first rodeo. He was also in cahoots with 28-year-old Christian Martinez, who'd been formally charged with human trafficking offenses. While Homero was easily able to pass through the US-Mexico border, he hadn't accounted for another major factor: heat. So with the sweltering temperatures going well above 100 degrees and no water supply in his cargo container, the poor migrants were basically stuck inside a moving oven. The air conditioner also had died, which Homero didn't even account for. As a result, all 53 of the workers died in the back of his truck. According to reports, a lot of these migrants boarded the vehicle to escape poverty and live a better life in the US. On top of this, the operation was run like a well-oiled machine, since they even had a stash house for transferring workers between trucks to avoid suspicion. At some point, Homero realized what had happened and ditched the truck, but he was eventually found hiding in a bush nearby and was arrested by police. Apparently, he was also under the influence of methamphetamines. He now faces a sentence of life in prison and up to $250,000 in fines. Number 3. Heist Man. In July 2022, a Kitchener man was arrested after ramming his truck into a business and stealing merchandise. According to Waterloo Police, the 39-year-old man was in a transport truck with a trailer and was looking for an opportunity to break into a store and steal stuff. When that opportunity presented itself at around 5 a.m. on a Saturday morning, he reversed the truck straight through the store's window and broke in. Obviously, at the time, so early in the day, the store near Highland Road West was empty, with no one around the area to stop the rogue trucker. The man had free reign, so he took his sweet time getting everything he wanted. As a matter of fact, he apparently caused over $30,000 worth of damage, including the items he stole. Oddly enough, after he was done stealing, he didn't just hop back into the vehicle and drive away. Instead, he abandoned it and decided to escape on foot instead. With that being said, he was eventually arrested and charged with dangerous operation, breaking and entering to commit theft, and failure to report the incident. He awaits a formal sentence for his crime. Number 2. Oncoming traffic. In 2019, a Massachusetts truck driver steered into oncoming traffic and killed 7 members of a motorcycle club. 23-year-old Volodymyr Zajewski was towing a car carrier along Route 2 when he reached for a drink, but he may have underestimated his ability to keep control of the vehicle, since his truck shifted weight and steered itself straight into oncoming traffic on the other side of the road. Coming down the opposite side was a group of bikers from the Jarheads Motorcycle Club, which is mostly made of Marines. Then, in a split second, Szykusky's truck rammed straight into them, killing 7 riders and injuring many more. There was a massive outpouring of support for the riders killed, with a memorial being built for them called the Fallen 7. While the driver pleaded not guilty, saying he was just reaching for a drink, toxicology reports revealed he had detectable levels of fentanyl, morphine, and cocaine in his system at the time of the accident. As a result, he now faces a life sentence in prison. Number 1. Raining money. In July 2022, a Jamaican truck driver gained access to a customer's vault and ran away with almost $1 million. 28-year-old Juvel Thompson was a driver and delivery man for the Vault Security Company. While he had been in the business for a while, he couldn't help himself when he came that close to so much money. He had to take risks to make a quick buck. Unfortunately for Juvel, his ambitions were much greater than stealing just a few $100,000. He wanted to steal the whole lot and become an overnight millionaire. So on a Saturday night, he signed for the vault key and transported the cash to Royal Flat. But instead of delivering it, he opened the vault and took the entire stock of $750,000 with him home. Sadly for him, his newfound riches were short-lived, since he was arrested a few days later and charged with embezzlement. Number 10. Who's salty? On a Spirit Airlines flight on March 27, 2019, an intoxicated woman threw a fit, argued with a flight attendant, and then showed her goodies off to the passengers. It all started with her talking to a flight attendant. We're not sure what exactly they were talking about, but the conversation quickly got heated. The woman began screaming very loudly and was shouting obscenities at the stewardess. What happened next was an unhinged rant of biblical proportions. As the drunk woman stood in the middle of the aisle, she kept screaming and ranting about things that really didn't make any sense. One of the things she kept repeating was the phrase, "Who's salty?" As she was doing this, multiple passengers had their phones out recording her. When she realized she had at least a dozen phones pointed at her, she bent over, lifted her dress, and showed everyone her butt. As if showing her bare bottom to a group of strangers on an airplane wasn't enough, she then went on to twerk in front of everyone. She thought she was the star of her own personal show. Everyone on board got front row seats to a super strange and unwanted burlesque show. When she was done, she took her belongings from the overhead compartment and marched off the plane while everyone clapped. Number 9. Playboy model gets kicked off flight. Eve J. Marie, a Playboy model, was kicked off a Southwest Airlines flight with her 7-year-old son in October 2020. She just boarded her flight from Dallas to Tulsa. Moments after she got on the plane, flight attendants asked her and her son to leave immediately. But why? Apparently, Eve was wearing a top that airline employees felt was too revealing. Yes, in this day and age, a woman and her child were kicked off a plane because the airport officials didn't like her outfit. The Instagram influencer and Playboy model had a low-cut leopard print top that showed off quite a bit of cleavage. According to the crew, it was a bit too much cleavage and went against their dress code policy. Eve was humiliated, embarrassed, and extremely offended as she walked off the plane with her kid. Eve didn't go down without a battle, though. When she confronted employees at the airport, she demanded to know what exactly their policy entails, but they couldn't agree on anything. What it really came down to was that her chest was too large, her shirt was too small, and it simply made some people uncomfortable. In the end, she was allowed back on the flight, provided she covered her chest with a blanket. Number 8. Duct tape to her seat. In July of 2021, an unnamed woman spent most of her trip from Dallas-Fort Worth to Charlotte duct taped to her seat. According to the airline, she attacked the flight attendants and then tried to open the front door of the plane. What the heck? It was a pretty unusual outburst, and it started about 1.5 hours into the flight, where most people on board had no idea that it was actually happening. The attendants were running up and down the aisles, whispering to one another, locking bathroom doors, and acting very suspicious. They wouldn't say what was going on, but it was clear that there was some kind of distress. It appeared like they were in the midst of some secret chaos. Unbeknownst to most of the passengers, a lady had gotten up, exclaimed that she needed to get off the plane, and started banging on the exit door. When the attendants tried to subdue her, she used her mouth as a weapon and started biting them. They had no other choice but to duct tape her to her seat. We aren't sure what motivated this woman to try opening a door mid-flight, but when the plane landed, she was taken into custody by police, and that's the last we heard. Number 7. Snakes on a plane. This time, the unruly passenger isn't a human, but a snake. An AirAsia plane was forced to make an unscheduled landing in early 2022 because a snake was moving through the overhead lights. Passengers could see its silhouette shining through the cabin's light casings like some evil shadow making its way towards the cockpit. These kinds of incidents don't happen often. Somehow, the snake got on board the flight before they left the capital of Kuala Lumpur on the route to Tawu on the Borneo Islands. As soon as the pilot realized the snake was bothering the passengers and slithering through the lights, he took the appropriate actions. He landed 560 miles or just over 900 kilometers short of the destination so that the plane could be fumigated. Why would you fumigate the plane? Well, no one knew what kind of snake it was. All they could see was a black outline of its body. And this is Malaysia we're talking about, where there are numerous species of extremely venomous serpents. It was a big risk to the people on board, even though the chief safety officer for AirAsia, Long Tien Ling, said no time was the crew at risk. However, if the snake had proved to be venomous and it fell onto somebody's lap, this would be a very different story. What would you do if you saw a snake on your flight? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. Number 6. Delta Karen. In December 2021, Patricia Cornwall was arrested for slapping a passenger across the face on a Delta flight. She has since been dubbed the Delta Karen. Like many ridiculous Karen incidents, the whole outburst was captured on video, but this wasn't the first time Cornwall had gotten in trouble. She was also arrested on a separate occasion for trying to fight a police officer in Florida following a DUI. Let's talk about the DUI first. Patricia crashed her car on November 10th in Santa Rosa Beach. At first, she refused to exit the vehicle or even tell the police her name. When she finally got out, it was pretty obvious she was wasted. She attacked one of the deputies, she could barely talk, and totally bombed the sobriety test. According to court documents, Patricia had a long and terrible history of violent outbursts and erratic behavior. She also had a DUI in 2020. Clearly, she has some issues. As for the incident on the Delta Airlines flight, it started when Patricia got out of her seat as the drink cart was rolling by. It was blocking her way, and the flight attendant asked her to sit in a vacant seat until the beverage service was over. Patricia's response was, "What am I, Rosa Parks?" And in response to that bizarre question, an older man on the flight said, quote, "You aren't black, this isn't Alabama, and this isn't a bus." This caused Patricia to have a full-blown attack of psychosis. She screamed at the man for not wearing a mask, even though he was eating and even though she didn't have a mask on either. She punched the senior citizen in his face. As soon as the plane landed, she was arrested and taken into custody by the FBI. Number 5. Plane Drama. 27-year-old Dana Mustafa was on a flight from Frankfurt, Germany to Washington, D.C. 2 years ago when she began acting noticeably strange. It all started when she lit a cigarette in the plane's bathroom, causing the smoke detector to go off. Crew members told Mustafa that smoking wasn't allowed and told her to return to her seat. She started crying and told flight attendants that she had been in Germany to visit family and that they were all killed by a drunk driver. They noticed that she smelled very strongly of alcohol. A little while later, Mustafa headed towards the toilet again while flicking a lighter in her hand. She became combative when flight attendants tried to stop her from entering the bathroom. Federal air marshals intervened when she pushed one of the flight attendants away and tried slamming the door. Allegedly, she refused to comply, resisted being handcuffed, and even kicked one of the air marshals. Reportedly, after being subdued, Mustafa threatened to stab everyone on the plane and then commit suicide. She then wondered out loud, quote, "What's the point of living?" A half-empty bottle of vodka was found in her carry-on bag, and Mustafa was charged with assaulting a federal officer. She may have just had to deal with a lot of family drama, but she's now facing up to 8 years in prison if convicted for her plane fiasco. Number 4. The Mile High Fight Club. In summer of 2020, a fight broke out in the middle of a flight when two drunk British guys refused to wear their masks. The plane was traveling from Amsterdam to Ibiza. It was a serious bro-down, with the two unruly British passengers, one of them not even wearing a shirt, got into a brawl with one of the other passengers. Even though the flight started out just between the two guys, eventually the whole plane got involved. It was pandemonium. The shirtless man got punched in the nose and started bleeding all over people. He ended up pinned down in the middle of the aisle while the rest of the passengers tried to defuse the chaos. Imagine a mosh pit on an airplane. It's not unusual to see vacation goers already drunk when they get on an airplane in preparation for their big vacation, and that's exactly what happened here. But unfortunately for the men who were on their way to Spain for some fun, the fun ended when they were arrested upon their arrival. Instead of enjoying their vacay, these guys were hauled off by Spanish cops. and all because they couldn't be bothered to wear their masks or put on their shirts. Number 3. Bad gas. A pilot was forced to make an emergency landing after a passenger refused to stop farting. The passenger wouldn't stop breaking wind on board a Transavia Airlines flight from Dubai to Amsterdam Schiphol. The two unfortunate Dutchmen sitting next to him didn't take very well to his flatulence, but the unashamed man was apparently not put off and refused to hold anything back. Members of the flight crew were apparently less than sympathetic and refused to do anything about it. Despite a warning from the pilot, a brawl between the men broke out, causing the flight to make an unscheduled early pit stop at Vienna Airport. Police boarded the plane with dogs and removed the two men after the pilot made a report about, quote, passengers on the rampage. Two sisters that were sitting in the same row were also removed. The sisters claimed they had nothing to do with the fight. In a report, one of the sisters said, quote, we had no idea who these boys were, we just had a bad luck to be in the same row and we didn't do anything. All I will say is that the crew were really provocative and stirred things up. All 4 passengers have since been released and were not arrested as they had not really broken any Austrian laws. However, they've all been banned from Transavia Airlines, who say that the 2 girls were indeed involved in the fight. Guess we'll never know. Number 2. Mask mandate. Like a lot of people, 23-year-old Adelaide Schroewang didn't agree with the coronavirus-related mask mandates, and in July of 2021 she was determined to exercise what she felt was her freedom and refused to wear a mask after boarding a Delta flight at Southwest Florida International Airport. Airline crew reported that Adelaide wouldn't stop arguing with the flight attendants despite their insistence, and when other passengers became involved, the young woman started spitting at them. 2 uniformed officers gave Adelaide one final chance to put her mask on, but instead of complying, she accused them of violating her human rights. She was then dragged off the plane and taken into custody. Throughout the ordeal, Adelaide could be heard repeatedly asking the men why they were putting their hands on her and what made them think they had the right to do so. She accused the so-called system of being threatening, but an unsympathetic officer simply replied, "That's the way it is." Adelaide's behavior constituted just one of more than 3,000 reported incidents of unruly passengers so far that year. Many of these individuals had issues with federally imposed COVID-19 restrictions, including a mask mandate. But the reality is that anyone who chose not to follow the policy would simply be removed from their flight. Schroewang was charged with resisting an officer, trespassing, and interference with aircraft operations. She reportedly continued to act combative as she was hauled off the plane and taken to jail. Number 1. Unstable. During a 3-hour flight over China in 2018, a mentally ill middle-aged man began behaving irrationally. A security officer on board noticed that the passenger, who was traveling alone, seemed unable to focus. He also had bloodstains on his clothing. The officer kept a close eye on the individual and saw he was getting more and more upset. Less than an hour before the plane was scheduled to land, the man demanded that the crew let him call his family. But since there was no phone signal on board, this wasn't possible. He started pacing back and forth in the cabin and shouting that the aircraft wasn't safe. A flight attendant later told the press that the passenger said he wanted to parachute off the plane. Things took a scary turn just minutes before the plane landed. Footage captured by a passenger showed the distressed man stomping on the floor, smashing a plane window with his phone and trying to open the aircraft's emergency door. As the plane prepared to land, crew members struggled to get the man under control. One flight attendant was injured in the effort, but they managed to restrain him. When the plane landed, police immediately showed up to remove the unruly passenger. The airline speculated that he was mentally ill, but did not go into detail about the suspected nature of the man's illness. Thanks for watching. Would you rather confront a Karen on a plane or a snake? Let us know in the comments below and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time on The Bad Badger.